Wentworth started school when he was 3, and they told him he was too young, he had to go home, so he didn't get to start again until he was 4. He's been going to school ever since. He's 16 years old now, will be 17 day after tomorrow. Wentworth's mother founded the Girl Guides in the Gold Coast. His father is a police inspector, and like most civil servants, gets transferred a lot. Every 2 years, Wentworth says, and so he's seen most of his country as his father's been being transferred from one place to the other. He told me that just before he came to this country, his father started calling him Wentworth. He'd been Kitty since the day he was born to his family. His father wanted him to know who was calling him, so he started calling him Wentworth, but we don't do it either. He's Kitty to us just like he is to his family, so you'll hear no Wentworth. The third student is Dick John from Australia. Dick likes rowing and tennis, debating. He's a prefect of his school, a very good student, and very interested in agriculture because his father owns quite a large sheep farm. Now, how about this question? You've been in our high schools for 6 or 7 weeks. There's one thing about America you do know, it's their high schools. Are they as good as your high schools, Dick?
Well, I think my education has been better up to this moment.
How about you, Aline?
Some cases worse, I think.
How about you, Kitty?
I think the average American student is educated more than the average student in the Gold Coast. This is because although the standard of education in our high schools are higher than those in the United States, we have only a few high schools, and not many people have a chance to go to high school anyway.
Dick, why do you say your education up to now has been better than the Americans you've been meeting here of your age?
Well, in the first place, we don't have quite so many to educate, not nearly so many for that matter. Secondly, I think that our teachers are really of a higher standard than they are in the United States.
Can you explain that?
Well, they are paid better. I think that they are paid much better, in fact, than in the U.S. And one thing that has struck me since I've been here very much and has made quite an impression on me, which we don't have at home, I personally don't agree with them, is the objective test, which you have in the U.S. I've brought some samples along here that you might be interested in. This paper that I have here is an objective test on Macbeth.
By that you mean true, false, or multiple choice questions?
Quite a variety, true, false, and multiple choice, all sorts, in fact. For example, one question here, a true, false question. Marlowe wrote Macbeth.
Marlowe
wrote
Macbeth.
Macbeth, true or false? Another question in this little series is that Macbeth is pervaded with joy and happiness, true or false? And also many other multiple choice questions.
Is the whole test on Macbeth?
The whole test is on Macbeth.
116 questions. Well, now, what's wrong with this? How does it compare, in other words, with... Have you ever had a test question on a Shakespearean play?
Yes, we have problem or essay type questions, and whereas you have 116 questions there to answer in, say, the period that you do English,
40 minutes or so?
About 40 minutes or so. We have one question to answer.
In 40 minutes?
In 40 minutes, yes.
Well, have you got one there on a Shakespearean play that would give an example?
Yes, I'll take an example from one of our question papers, English paper. This one is on Othello, incidentally. It is Othello, in your opinion, a tragic hero or a pathetic simpleton? And I think that you can get much more out of that than you can out of those 116 short questions, such as Marlowe wrote Shakespeare, wrote Macbeth, as you were, true or false.
Those are interesting, Dick. You got any other examples of test questions?
Yes, I have, just to prove my point. I hope it will prove my point anyhow on this. For example, one in the Industrial History and Economics paper. This is on the mercantile system in England. The mercantile system aimed at national security and economic nationalism. Outline the development of this system within England itself.
That's a high school?
That's a high school question. Yes. Another one that you may be interested in on the history paper. I know some of you have been doing Edmund Burke in your classrooms. Explain the argument in Edmund Burke's reflections on the revolution in France. Can you reconcile his attitude on this matter with his views on other contentious questions of his day?
Do you have questions like that too,
The
Elise?
same, Mrs. Waller. Our questions are all the essay-type questions, not those that you have done there. Well, as a matter of fact, may I explain to you why I said our education is worse in
Yes,
South
I
Africa?
wish you would.
Well, it's a little bit different in South Africa. When you speak of book knowledge, our education is exactly alike as in America. When you speak of things that are important in life, for instance, your behavior towards your superiors, You get that in South Africa to a bigger extent than in America. And debating. We don't have very many discussions in school classes, but we have debating societies. And every fortnight or once in 3 weeks, we have inter-debates with other schools. So
in other words,
yes, we get the debating too. But the reason why I said our education in one instance is worse is because in America they have more current events. Politics in South Africa is not allowed in schools. With the result, they cut out current events too.
Let
which
Kitty
I
get
think
into
is
this.
wrong.
Well, I think Dick and Eileen are both talking about the public schools. I've been in one private school, and the students, I think, have the same type of questions you have over here. Well, personally, I have about the same type of questions in the Gold Coast.
You mean you have essay type
we
or...
have essay type, and that's because all the schools are private schools. We don't have any public schools in the Gold Coast. But some of the private schools in the United States have the same type of questions.
Well, Dick, you've been in private schools. You have too, Aileen. What do you think about the private schools in America compared to the public schools?
Well, I think that the private schools are a very good institution in America, which is against what many people over here think. But I will say that I don't think the standard in them is really very much higher than the public schools. I don't think it is at
Well,
all.
Mrs. Waller, if I was an American and if I live in America, I wouldn't even think of sending my girl to a public school if I can afford a private school.
Really?
Well,
Wait a minute, let Kitty get it.
well, I don't think you'll feel that way if you were from the Gold Coast. Right now in the Gold Coast, we don't have any public schools. All the schools we have, they have private schools. And it costs a lot to be able to go to school. We have only a few government scholarships. And most of the students have to pay just about $200 a year in the high schools. And I think if we had public schools in the Gold Coast, nobody would ever think of sending his child to a private school instead of a public school. Because after all, I don't think the difference between the students in the private schools and in the public schools in the United States is much.
Well, Kitty, if you are a Gold Coaster, but remember I said if I was an American.
Well, now explain further why you would send a child to a private school in America instead of a public school.
On account of the fact that the behavior or the attitude from a student in the public school and a student in the private school towards his teachers who are his superiors are so much different.
Do you think the standard of education is any different in the private
No.
schools and public schools?
No, You get private schools having a very high standard, you get them having a low standard. You get public schools on account of the fact that your schools are state-controlled and not government-controlled. You get your public schools with your lower education standard and your public schools with your higher education
Well, Eileen, I don't think so. I've been in the public school, two public schools and one private school. And in the private school, it's very interesting. The students call their teachers by the first name. And one of the teachers is called Mike, and they always call him Mike. Whilst in the public schools, they usually call the teachers by their surnames, although they are very...
It all proves the great diversity that there is in America. What were you going to say, Dick?
I was going to say that if I was in the United States, I wouldn't send my children to the private schools. For one reason, the fact that they all seem to stick themselves right out in the country, right away from everybody. They're not in the cities, they're in the country, they become a little community within themselves.
Exclusive?
It's a little too exclusive in some respects, I think. Within
Well,
the
isn't that true in Australia?
Well, no, it's not true in Australia. Most of our private schools there are situated in the cities. They take day boys. And most of the schools, in fact, have, or many of them, have more day boys than boarders. And this tends to make them rather outgoing in their community, in the community life, with active parents and citizens associations, parents-teachers associations. But the boarding life of the school forms actually the core of the private school.
I'm sorry to contradict you, Dick. I have been in a public school in Westfield, and it hasn't even had a boarding school, and it's in the middle, in the center of Westfield. And that pupils in that school, they contributed to the rest of the community as well as any other public school in that
Well,
community.
again, more diversity in America.
Yeah.
But let's come back to this point. You both seem to agree, and Kitty too, that the standards in your high schools for book learning are higher than they are in American high schools. Now, why?
Well, you see, in the Gold Coast, we have a different education policy. It's impossible in the Gold Coast to have something like public schools because we haven't got enough money. You can't say you want to give everybody free education. Therefore, the few people who are able to go to high school and who we can afford to give education in the high school, we try to cram as much information as we can into them. See what I mean?
I see. Yes, wait. Go ahead.
I think that one of the reasons we have higher standards over there in academic work is the fact that the schools are state-controlled.
You have higher academic standards because schools are state-controlled?
State-controlled, yes.
Now explain that one.
Well, we have a very big public examination at the end of the high school year.
Well, don't you think excuse me, but don't you think it's a good thing in America that schools are not state-controlled?
No, I don't think it's a good thing at all.
Why not?
Well, I think that you have inequality of opportunity in America through the fact that they are not state-controlled.
Wait a minute. That we have inequality of opportunity
have
in American education.
Yes, you have inequality of opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with Dick on this point. You find that in some of the communities, some of the rich communities, the school have much more opportunities than in some of the poorer communities. For example, there's one school in Leonia and there's another school in perhaps Hastings. And these schools are both public schools, but they're not at all the same. In one of the schools, you have, you can call from the headmaster's office to the classrooms by using a telephone. In the other schools, you can, and in other schools, you don't have as much science equipment as you have in the other schools.
I think I begin to see your point, although it sort of set me back on my heels when you said we don't have equality of opportunity because they're community controlled. I think what you mean is that since there isn't a national standard, one school with less money in its community pays its teachers less. But of course, you know why we do that. We don't want state control. And as a matter of fact, Dick, when I was reading this test paper of yours, I found a question that proves my point.
Yes,
Why
what
we
is
don't want state control in the United States. Now, maybe this is being unfair to you, but I'm just taking the test question you gave me. It says, one of the problems today is the extent to which central government should control the economic system. Discuss three main defects. Discuss three main defects of an unplanned economy and show why the Australian government has taken an increasingly important part in controlling economic activities. I'd say that was a question weighted in terms of state control. Why didn't they say, explain the defects and the advantages of state control?
Well, first of all, to answer that, I'll have to say that in our schools, both sides of the question is taught. There is no set pattern that the three main defects of an unplanned economy will be taught. Both sides of the question are taught. In fact, our economics teacher was very biased, a very fixed conservative, almost to the point of being a reactionary. Possibly this question might be loaded. I might mention that it's not set by the state, by anyone in the government, but by a professor in the university. And, of course, he might have his own views and has loaded it in that way. But anyhow, I don't think that you have... I don't think that you're free to express yourself in your school, so how can you talk to me about that being a loaded question?
You're throwing him fast, boy.
I agree with Dick about this. In some of the schools some of the students have raised the subject of communism. And most of the teachers try as much as possible not to get the students to be interested in this subject. Well, from my point of view, I think that before you can fight against anything, you must be able to understand and analyze it. Before, let's assume you're a boxer. Before you go into a ring and try to fight somebody, you must have a fair idea of what his weight is like, what he fights like. And before I think you can fight communism efficiently, you must be able to analyze it and to be able to understand what the real threat is. And I think the United States will do very good to let the students understand what communism really is and what the threat is, so that they will be able to fight it efficiently.
Yes, Dick.
I have talked.
You're next.
I have talked to delegates myself who have stated that whenever they have broached the subject of communism or political subjects in their classrooms, that the teachers have switched the subject in a most amazing fashion, in an almost a way that they're frightened to talk about that subject.
Have you found that, Aline?
Well, not to the same extent as Dick has found it, but I want to say something on politics in schools too. What I want to say is I've spoken to quite a few American students, and I've asked them what they think about leading politics in American schools. And they quite frankly told me that after leaving school, they always think the way their teacher thinks. She, although not stating it, although not saying it in that word, she sort of leads them in a certain way. And when they leave school, they have that viewpoint and that way of thinking about politics, whether Democratic or Republican.
Well, that is
they
not
have
fair,
that
is it?
feeling.
Well, again, there's a great diversity in America. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say that I know one teacher in the high school that I have been in who was a staunch Republican, very staunch Republican. but she was willing to let the students discuss the other points of view, the Democratic point of view, the Republican point of view, and she would quite often take the opposite, the opposing case, just to invite discussion, and invite research on that subject so they could get the better of that teacher.
I'd
And
like
that-
to know
which is
this
a
from
very
you,
good
too. I'm
fact.
sorry to hurry you along, but I do want to find out from you whether the high schools you've been in, whether the students have known anything or quite a lot about your own country.
Miss Waller, it's amazing how the United States students know very little about the rest of the world, especially Africa, Australia, and Latin America.
Really?
Well, no, because right now in the world struggles, as you call them, Africa, Australia, and Latin America have been let out of the entire picture of the world.
Is that true, do you think, Dick? It's true.
Well, I think so, and I think it's very important for the United States students to learn about Africa, and not only the United States students, but English students and, well, all the
But,
students
Kitty,
in the
there's
world.
so much to learn. The world is such a big place, you don't have time, and the things an American student would say that are vitally important to him are Europe, studying about Europe and studying about Asia. Why should he learn about
Wait a
Africa?
minute, Miss Waller. Africa is as important as Asia is now in the world struggle. You find that now in Africa there are many changes, many dynamic changes that are going very fast. The Gold Coast is expected to be independent in only about 5 months' time.
The Gold Coast will be independent
Only
in
about
5
months' time. And very fast changes going on. And I have a feeling, I believe very strongly that the entire history of the world is going to be changed by this change which are going on in Africa right now.
Would you say that in the Gold Coast the Africans are advancing faster, say, than the Africans in the Union of South Africa?
Yeah, I should think so. I should think that the Africans in the Gold Coast are advancing a little bit faster than they are doing in South Africa.
Kitty, you said a little time ago, in the Gold Coast you don't have free education.
Yeah,
You
we don't
must
have
pay for your
free
education. In South Africa, the Africans have right throughout free education.
No, wait.
Right free education.
But I think that for a country to be independent and fend for itself in the world now is more important than free
But
education.
how can they do it without money, Kitty? Without having the right money?
No.
Without having the opportunity of educating the people, because they must draw themselves back to private education.
Wait,
the state can't even give the
right now in the
education.
Gold Coast we have about 60% of the people who are educated. Therefore, you can't really say that nearly all the people are illiterate. That's out of the question. But I believe that if the Gold Coast were a republic or perhaps something like a dominion, it will have a more fair play in its trade with the United States perhaps or with England. Right now, the gold mines and the diamond mines in the Gold Coast, really, I think everything in the Gold Coast except the cocoa farms are being owned by British merchants and British people. And they have to export all these things to England. And all we get out of the gold and diamonds in the Gold Coast right now is the export duty, that's all.
But Kitty, will that situation change when you become independent?
Yeah, I think
Will
so.
you throw out those people owning the mines in 5 months' time and
No.
take all over state control?
We don't have to throw them out, but when...
But what are you going to do with them if you take away the mines and put it under state control?
Well, in the first place, you have to bear in mind that there are not many white settlers in the Gold Coast as there are in South Africa.
But the people
the
that
white
are
people,
there-
the white people in the Gold Coast do not settle. They all go away after working. And if the Gold Coast government is controlled by the Africans, we can allow the white men to own the mines on our own conditions.
Would you say, Kitty, that you're getting your freedom quicker because the white man didn't stay in your country? He just came and left very quickly, whereas in the Gold Coast, the white man, in Union of South Africa, the white man came and stayed?
I think that is one of the factors which is promoting the fact that we are going to be independent in a few months' time. The other